some moments, folks, but it got a little near the knuckle. That's when I straightened out in the middle of that album. That's when I realized.
You could always count on John Lennon to tell the truth, even when that truth cut deep. He didn't dress it up in polite smiles or safe answers. Lennon didn't believe in hiding who he was. Not behind his fame, not behind the music, not behind the walls people tried to build around him. He lived with a kind of fearless honesty that could make people uncomfortable, and he didn't care. That's what made him dangerous. It's also what made him unforgettable. When Lennon loved something, he loved it fiercely. When he hated something, the whole world knew. That's the energy that ran through everything he touched. Raw, alive, and impossible to fake. Music wasn't just sound to Lennon. It was his pulse, his compass, the thing that reminded him who he was when fame tried to make him forget. He once said that the best songs were the ones that told the truth, even the ugly truth. That's how he chose his favorite albums, too. Not by what sold the most copies or what critics adored, but by what hit him hardest. These weren't background records. They were soul maps, guiding him through chaos, fame, and self-doubt. Behind the sharp tongue and clever humor lived a listener. A boy from Liverpool who felt everything too deeply, who found salvation in sound. The albums he loved weren't just influences. They were confessions, lessons, and mirrors, reflecting the man he'd become. So today, we're diving into the 10 rock albums John Lennon called his favorites, the ones that shook his world and shaped his soul. These aren't just records, they're revelations. If you love music that cuts deep, hit subscribe and tell us, which of these do you think changed Lennon the most? When this album hit the airwaves, it didn't ask to be heard. It demanded it. Lennon didn't just like Little Richard. He worshipped him. The moment he heard Tutti Frutti, something inside him cracked open. This wasn't polite, polished music. This was chaos set to rhythm, rebellion wrapped in sound. Lennon later said that Little Richard taught him that music should make you lose control. It should make you scream. The pounding piano, the unrestrained voice, the wild joy. It was everything Lennon wanted to be. To him, Little Richard wasn't just an artist. He was a prophet. Years later, you could still hear that fire in Lennon's own voice, that refusal to be tamed. Little Richard didn't just influence him. He gave him permission to be loud, messy, and real. If Little Richard gave Lennon permission to scream, Chuck Berry taught him how to speak. After-school session was a revelation, not just because it rocked, but because it told stories. Berry's lyrics painted entire worlds in 3 minutes. He wrote about cars, school, freedom, frustration, real life, sung with cleverness and bite. Lennon once said that Berry was the rock and roll poet he'd been searching for. The Beatles would later cover his songs as a tribute, but it was never just imitation. It was gratitude. Lennon loved that Berry made rock intelligent without losing its edge. Roll over Beethoven. Too much monkey business. These weren't just songs. They were blueprints for honesty in music. Lennon learned that lyrics could be witty, angry, and true all at once. Chuck Berry didn't make him want to sing louder. He made him want to write better. Before there was fame, before there were Beatles, there was Elvis. Lennon often said that before Elvis, there was nothing. When that first album dropped, just a young man with a sneer and a sound the world hadn't heard, Lennon was transfixed. Elvis wasn't just cool. He was dangerous, magnetic, alive. The way he moved, the way he sounded, the way he seemed to live without apology. Lennon felt that. He said Elvis made him want to start a band, not because he wanted to be famous, but because he wanted to feel that free. Every note of that debut album felt like rebellion, not against rules, but against fear itself. And in Lennon's eyes, that was the real meaning of rock and roll. Lennon admired Buddy Holly for a different reason. Holly didn't look like a rock star, and that's exactly why Lennon loved him. The glasses, the soft voice. He was proof that you didn't need to fit an image to matter. Holly's songs were clever, vulnerable, and full of life. Lennon studied his songwriting, how each line flowed naturally, how emotion sat quietly beneath the melody. That'll Be the Day and Peggy Sue weren't just hits. They were masterclasses in simplicity. Lennon once said that Buddy Holly made it okay to be human in music. When the Beatles first took the stage, their name was partly inspired by Holly's band, the Crickets. That's how deep his influence ran. It wasn't about imitation. It was about gratitude. When Lennon first heard Dylan, something changed. Until then, rock music had mostly been about energy, rhythm, rebellion, volume. But Dylan brought poetry. The freewheelin' Bob Dylan hit Lennon like a mirror held up to his own mind. Songs like Blowin' in the Wind and A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall carried more than melody. They carried meaning. Lennon said Dylan made him realize that songs could ask questions, not just deliver hooks. After this album, his own writing started to shift. You can hear it in Norwegian Wood, in Help, in the growing complexity of his lyrics. Dylan gave Lennon something he didn't know he was missing: honesty without volume, truth without shouting. And from that moment, rock and roll would never be the same. Yes, Lennon even counted his own band's early rock recordings among his favorites, not out of ego, but out of nostalgia. These were the songs that took him back, to smoky clubs in Hamburg, to the endless nights of sweat and laughter and sound. The Beatles' early energy wasn't about fame or money. It was about survival, about escaping the ordinary. When Lennon listened back to those raw tracks, he heard youth, chaos, and unfiltered joy. Twist and Shout, Long Tall Sally, Money, they weren't perfect, and that's why he loved them. It reminded him of the moment before the world knew their names, when music was still just four friends chasing a dream. If the freewheelin' Bob Dylan cracked open Lennon's mind, Highway 61 Revisited blew the doors off completely. By this point, Dylan had gone electric, and Lennon couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was angry, surreal, and brilliant. Everything rock and roll was supposed to be, but smarter. Songs like a Rolling Stone and Ballad of a Thin Man didn't just tell stories, they attacked them. Dylan had turned rock into literature, and Lennon wanted to know how. He once said this was the album that made him realize he didn't have to write pop songs anymore. He could write truths. That idea would shape Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Imagine. What Lennon admired most was Dylan's courage, his refusal to stay in one box. When the crowd booed Dylan for going electric, he kept playing. Lennon loved that. He saw himself in it, a man who couldn't stop changing, no matter who it scared. It might sound strange to list his own album among his favorites. But for Lennon, Plastic Ono Band wasn't a record. It was therapy. It was the sound of a man ripping himself open after years of silence. He wrote it after undergoing primal scream therapy, and you can hear that in every line. Mother, Working Class Hero, God. These weren't songs meant to entertain. They were meant to purge. Lennon once said that this album was him without the Beatle thing, stripped to the bone, finally honest. It's messy, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, and that's exactly why he loved it. To him, this was what music was supposed to be, not perfect, but real. It wasn't about pleasing fans or critics. It was about survival. Listening to it, you don't just hear Lennon, you feel him. All the anger, grief, and confusion he'd carried for years finally came spilling out, and he didn't care how ugly it sounded. He just wanted the truth. If Plastic Ono Band was Lennon breaking free, Sgt. Pepper was the moment he and the Beatles reached the heavens. Lennon once described it as the band's peak of madness and magic. Every sound, every lyric felt like a dream with no rules. He was proud of it not because it sold millions, but because it proved that music could be limitless. It was art disguised as rock. A Day in the Life, in particular, was one of his proudest creations, haunting, surreal, and brutally honest about modern life. Lennon said it was inspired by reading the morning newspaper. Just life's absurdity turned into poetry. To him, Sgt. Pepper was the sound of breaking boundaries, of what happened when four friends decided to stop following and start inventing. He didn't think it was perfect, but that was the point. It was alive. It was human, and for Lennon, that meant everything. It's impossible to talk about Lennon's musical journey without Imagine. To the world, it's his signature. To Lennon, it was something deeper, a prayer whispered into the chaos. He once said it was the best thing he ever wrote because it was simple and true. The message wasn't complicated. It was about hope, peace, and belief in something better. But what made it powerful was that it came from a man who had seen the darkest parts of himself. Imagine wasn't naive. It was Lennon trying to believe again. He'd been through anger, loss, and disillusionment, and this song, this album, was him choosing light anyway. Every piano note felt like a heartbeat. Every lyric felt like forgiveness. For Lennon, Imagine wasn't about changing the world. It was about surviving it. Before we close, there's one more record that Lennon always held close, his 1975 album Rock and Roll. It was a tribute to the songs and artists who raised him, from Chuck Berry to Little Richard. He recorded it during one of the most chaotic times in his life, but the music saved him. You can hear it, the nostalgia, the love, the gratitude. These were the songs that made him fall in love with music in the first place. It was like coming home. Lennon wasn't trying to reinvent anything here. He was saying thank you to the past, to the sound, to the dream that gave him everything. For Lennon, these albums weren't just a playlist. They were a timeline, each one marking a chapter in his life. From the kid in Liverpool strumming in his bedroom to the global icon searching for peace, each record mirrored a different piece of his heart. Some taught him rebellion. Some taught him honesty. Some taught him how to heal. Together, they formed the DNA of one of the most complex artists the world has ever known. And maybe that's the real lesson Lennon left behind. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about saying what everyone else is too afraid to say. Whether he was singing about love, loss, or the dream of a better world, John Lennon never lied to his audience, or to himself. That's what made him timeless, because honesty, even when it hurts, never goes out of style. He once said, "When you're drowning, you don't say, 'I would be incredibly pleased if someone would have the foresight to notice me drowning and come and help me.' You just scream." That's what his music was, a scream. Sometimes angry, sometimes joyful, but always true. And if you listen closely to these 10 albums, the ones that shaped him, the ones that saved him, you'll hear that same scream echoing through time. It's the sound of a man who refused to pretend. A man who, for better or worse, lived every note like it was his last. Because in the end, John Lennon didn't just make music. He made honesty sound beautiful.